This is Pierre Sabak. Good evening, everyone. And today I'm going to be talking to Philip Mantle. Now, Philip Mantle is perhaps best known as the granddaddy of British ufology. He really was at the beginning of British ufology, where it really began to take a prominence within the world. And he's been a member of several organisations, very important organisations. So he was part of the, in 1987, he was a secretary to the National Investigations Committee. In 1988, he was appointed England's representative for the Mutual UFO Network, otherwise known as MUFON. He was awarded an honorary member of the Research Institute on Anomalous Phenomenon, appointed director of investigations of Bufora, and also he's an author of several books. These publications include Without Consent, Beyond Roswell, Russia's Roswell Incident, Roswell's Alien Autopsy, which we're going to be talking about in a moment, and Once Upon a Missing Time. Now, today we're going to be particularly talking about the documentary film Alien Autopsy, Search for Answers. And this is a four-part documentary on the famous alien autopsy, which was proven to be an hoax by Mr. Ray Santelli. So Philip Mantle, he researched this and he actually proved that it was an hoax. And this documentary, which is in four parts, is extremely well produced. It reminded me of Bob Lazar's documentary in terms of the production values, and it speaks to all of the principal players who was involved in the hoax. So I'm going to take it away, and I'm just going to ask you now, Philip, to give me a basic summary of what the documentary was, and in terms of how it's actually broken up as well, because there's four different parts to the documentary.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for those that are not aware, I was involved with the infamous Alien Autopsy film right from the very beginning, and I've followed it, you know, from its genesis right through to today. And first of all, the findings were in my book, Roswell Alien Autopsy, which I've updated. I've revised the book because, you know, I keep getting reminded, Pierre, that this year is 25 years since that damn film was first shown on television. Now, a lot of the early research, for example, was done pre-internet days. So I've got faxes, documents, you know, letters, all the, you know, transcripts. So I thought, rather than them just gathering dust in my filing cabinet, perhaps I'll put them in the new version of the book, which I did. So, and then I'd worked with a production company in London called Entertain Me. And I reminded them that, you know, this year was the 25th anniversary. And, you know, basically pitched an idea to them. My idea originally, Pierre, was just maybe a 1 hour, one-off documentary. So they came back to me last year and said, yeah. We're interested in this, Philip.
Yeah, this it's approximately 3 hours, and basically, for those who are interested in the documentary, it is split into four parts. So the first part is history to Roswell, but it also looks at other famous cases in context to Roswell, and also there's reference to the national security state. The second part is really the main emphasis, which is the study of the alien autopsy, and it's really speaking to all of the principal players. The third part then looks at the memo from Dr. Kit Green, and basically that in itself is an interesting story, and I really want to go into that and sort of quiz you about that a little bit, because that's extremely interesting. And then the fourth part really just summarizes everything. But I think it's nearly 3 hours, so it's very detailed, and for anyone who's actually interested in the alien autopsy, I think it's probably the most detailed documentary which has ever been produced on the subject. And you, Philip, are probably the world's leading expert in the case in terms of that you unraveled the case. I mean, I just found it amazing how you could find all these different players, such as the sculptor who sculpted the dummy, you found the person who directed it, you found the actors, you even, I think, found the location as well. So it was extremely well done. And again, it's a very complicated subject because there were numerous footage of the alien autopsy, and that in itself is a story. But I think what we should do is rewind back and just go back to the actual story. So in your own words, if you could just summarize what this documentary is about, that would be very useful.
Yeah, well, I think the title speaks for itself. It's a retrospective title. So it's Alien Autopsy, the search for answers. And the person that was searching for those answers, of course, was yours truly. Because, like I said, I was involved right from the very beginning. And for those that, I'll tell how it all started, Pierre. Back in 1993, we go back to. At that point, amongst other things, I was the press officer for the British UFO Research Association, BUFORA. And a letter arrived, like we had many such things, and it was from a production company, the Merlin Group, simply asking if we could assist with the making of a general UFO documentary. So I wrote back. The chap who ran this was called Ray Santilli. I sent him some information and some basic details of what we could and could not provide. And so, a few letters exchanged and a few faxes. It was the day of the fax machine back in 1993, Pierre. I thought I'd really made it when I got this big monstrosity sat on my desk that used to buzz and make funny noises and spit bits of paper out at me.
Can I just ask, in terms of the documentary, when you were saying you wanted to make a documentary, was this pre-Alien Autopsy? So was this a separate project?
No, this was, my idea was just a 1 hour thing.
Right, okay.
And it was the production company who really said, no, we want to do more than that.
Yeah. Okay.
We want, if we cover the story from A to Z, then we can't fit it all in 1 hour. For example, they spent 2 days filming here at my home and in the locality. And then I had another day, all day in London, filming at their studio. So it wasn't a quick thing. Plus, as you said, they've got other archive interviews and so on. So it was their idea. So we had to start from scratch. So in 1993, I phoned this gentleman called Ray Santilli, and we chatted about making a couple of documentaries maybe. And then out of the blue, Pierre, he changed direction. He said, well, Philip, I've actually got film of the UFO crash at Roswell. He didn't call it Roswell, he called it Roswell. And he said, I've got the beings being dissected. So I said, well, that changes things somewhat, so show me. I would always taught, if somebody makes a claim of anything, Pierre, then you should challenge them to support that claim.
I guess you was really excited because this potentially could be sort of the missing link, the piece of evidence, the smoking gun that everyone's been looking for, and you were sitting on top of this story. So how did you feel about that?
Well, I was intrigued rather than excited. I mean, having already been involved with UFO research since, the late 70s, I'd heard a lot of, fancy stories, and this was, as far as I was concerned, was just another one. So I was talking to a gentleman last night who didn't realize he played a small part in it. So in 1993, I was also hired to help promote the film, the movie, Fire in the Sky. One of the things we did, we organized a speaking engagement for Travis Walton and Mike Rogers while they were in London. So we put on an evening presentation with Travis and Mike at the London Business School. It's quite near Regent's Park. And then we had a press conference as well for them. But Ray Santilli's London offices were quite close by, so I actually invited him along, and he came. So that was the first time I met him, was at this evening presentation with Mike Rogers and Travis Walton. And then Ray in person told me this elaborate story of being out in Cleveland, Ohio in 1992. Ray's main area of business was then, and still is now, it's music, Pierre. He would license back catalogues, He would reform old pop groups from the 1960s and re-record some of their hits, all this kind of thing. And he said he'd been in Cleveland, Ohio, looking for old film or photographs of the rock and roll stars before they were famous. So they used to go on the, you know, the circuit around the colleges and so on. And he said he met an old boy who said, I was a freelance cameraman in the 50s and I've got a bit of Elvis film. And the company I work for are now closed, so there's no copyright issues. So Ray said he saw it, bought it, paid cash, no questions asked. Shortly before he was due to come home, Ray says that this old boy came back and he said, well, I like the way you do business. And if that was interesting to you, you should know that in 1947, I was a military cameraman and I was flown to Roswell, New Mexico, and I filmed the UFO crash and the aliens and so on. And he said, I sent most of the film back to HQ, but there was some films that needed some special processing that I held back. And at that point, later in the year, at that point, it used to be the Army and the Air Force were all one. But in September of 1947, they split into two separate entities. But he said they never came for it, so I just saved it. Are you interested? So Ray says he took an internal flight to this gentleman's house, literally put it on a projector and viewed it on the wall. He phoned Kodak and checked the edge codes that coincided with 1947. He was shown paperwork and photographs of this man's military career. They shook hands. It was going to be a cash deal, and he wouldn't reveal the cameraman's name. So, you know, I found, again, an amazing story. So I said the same as I'd said to him on the telephone, Pierre, you know, show me. You know, it's a great story. You know, come on. So again, we went, yes, I can. No, I can't. Yeah, you know. So in the end, I just said, you know, forget it. I don't believe you. See you later. So I forgot all about it. So we moved forward in time to 1995. And in the early part of 1995, I was sent a movie for review. And it was, believe it or not, Roswell. Stars Kyle MacLachlan, was produced by Paul Davids, was released by Sony. It was only a small release. This was no big fanfare. And again, I got a copy and I thought, oh, I wonder if that Santilli chap still claims to have this Roswell footage. And I got his business card, so I pulled it out of my, you know, my desk, picked up the phone and rang him. He says, yeah, I do still have it, Philip, but you don't believe me. So, well, I can't believe you, Ray, until you show me the damn thing. So he says, I'll tell you what, make an appointment with my secretary and come on down. Bearing in mind, I live 200 miles north of London from his offices. So my wife and I made an appointment and off we went. Met Santilli in his office, which is on Balcombe Street, which was famous for the Balcombe Street siege back in the 70s, not the 80s, where the SAS stormed the embassy there because they were holding hostages. So it's that particular street. Right. And, you know, Ray's office wasn't enormous, but it was over 3 floors and people were running up and down and it was a bit chaotic. We were sitting in his office and we have a nice chat, and then he's got his video player and he said, well, what's this? Sticks a VHS in. And he says, what you're watching now, Philip, is what we call the tent footage or the on-site footage. He claimed that one of the creatures, before it was shipped off, was held in like a field tent. And this was a piece of film of it in this field tent. So what you see on it, Pierre, is a creature lying on a slab of some description. It's covered pretty much apart from its head and its hands and its feet. There are 2 men beyond it in white coats. You see a blade flashing and you see them handling some fleshy material. The camera doesn't move. There's no soundtrack. And then a gentleman with his back keeps coming in front of the camera once in a while. There's an old lamp hanging down and what have you.
Was this footage colour which you saw, or black and white? Because
black and white, absolutely black and white. And to be perfectly honest, it was the kind of stuff I was thinking I was going to see. It wasn't of great quality, you know. It was dark. However, you could make out the features of these men. Their faces weren't covered or anything like that. And believe it or not, Santilli actually gave me a copy. And I have it still today. I can't play it now because who has a VHS player now, you know? But I still have it. So when he says there's more to come, he says I'm having it processed as we speak. So in the couple of months later, we go back again and again. And Ray showed me two, and this is an important part of it that people don't realize, two completely different autopsy films. Same location, same medical people, but the films are totally different. They do different type of medical procedure. The one that everyone's seeing, that the creature has a big hole in its leg, well, the other one doesn't. It's much clearer, and it lasts a little bit longer as well. And then we were shown some film that claims to be the debris, the wreckage.
Can I just ask, in terms of the two films, what was his reason that there were two films? Just that there were two creatures, or did he maintain?
Absolutely, yes. He said there was several creatures.
Oh, okay.
And then we were shown the debris, the wreckage, and these large hand panels, which had like a 6-fingered hand imprint in them. These creatures, bearing in mind, had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. So I said to Ray Santilli, I'm trying to think on my feet here, Pierre, because I didn't really expect to see anything like this. What are your intentions? What are you going to do with this? He said, I'm going to make my own little documentary, and you'll be able to buy a copy of it with all the film on, and it'll be sailing your local video high street, you know, your Woolworths that were still open then, I believe, you know, or you can buy it direct from me. And I thought to myself, the only way we're going to find anything out about this film is if we see it in the public domain. Then everybody can scrutinize it. So I said, just off the top of my head, one of the other things I did for Bufora at that point, Pierre, I was their conference organizer.
Right.
And in 1995, they had a conference already set up, done and dusted,
right,
for August in Sheffield.
Yeah.
So I said to Ray, will you show this film at our conference? And he said, if you help me research it. Yes, Philip. There's no money involved, no contracts. We shook hands, and that was it. So, you know, I'd kept some of my colleagues informed behind closed doors of Santilli's claims. Now I could at least verify that there was film. I couldn't verify the authenticity of it, but it was no longer a story.
Yeah. Did you feel excited about the film, or was you just...
I was puzzled. Right. More than anything, Pierre, because the first piece of film we saw, the tent footage, was very dark. And then we get to these two autopsy films, which are very clear, you know, they're totally different. And then we have this wreckage with these panels and these huge great I-beams with some kind of lettering on. So we shook hands and said, right, you know, we'll show it at the conference. And literally, apart from a few close colleagues who I knew wouldn't say anything, they'd keep it to themselves, almost nobody knew anything about it, Pierre. You know, it was my intention to let Santilli do whatever he wanted with it. We offered to help. When I say we, me, Bufora, to analyse it, to work on it. I agreed to work on his documentary that he did make. I actually wrote the documentary for him, and it's narrated by the well-known actor Brian Blessed. But when that came out, there isn't all the film on it, and so we moved forward in time. Somewhere around April 1995, April, and I had a colleague by the name of David Clark, who was now Dr. David Clark, and David was a journalist in Sheffield, and he worked, I believe, for the Sheffield Star at the time. And he was doing a small article about UFOs in the Sheffield Star. And he said, Philip, give me a quote for your UFO conference that you're having at Hallam University later this year. And I'll do a bigger piece nearer the time. So I said, okay, David, we've got this person coming, that person. And I just happened to say, we've got the Roswell alien autopsy. It just slipped out, Pierre. Right. You know, and I'd only got brief details. So, you know, David wrote this up and he published it. And then the following day, I get a phone call from a company called White's Press Agency in Sheffield. And all they were interested in was the alien autopsy film. They'd read David's article. So I could only repeat the story that Ray Santilli had told me.
Did you
You know,
disclose your source at this point?
absolutely.
Right.
You know, because I didn't really think that much of it. You know, this was a local newspaper. I had no idea who White's press agency was. So I told them the story and, you know, pretty much forgot about it. Well, 2 days later, Pierre, it just went mad. You know, White's had sent this thing out across the globe. I was getting phone calls and faxes from Australia. And because although we've mentioned Ray Santilli's name, his name wasn't in the telephone book. I hadn't mentioned his business.
Yeah.
But my name, you know, and I live, the town where I live, my name's in the phone book, so they could find me, no problem.
So you became his unofficial press officer?
I did. All I was, you know, forwarding it on to Ray, and he wasn't happy because he whatever plans he had to release it to the media, and I never knew that he had any in the first place, that had all gone. Pierre, you know, people have often said, "Oh, Santilli had a great marketing strategy." No, he didn't, because once it was in the public domain, the story just, you know, took off and had a life of its own.
Can I just ask you, do you think that if you hadn't told your friend who was writing for the press about this story, do you think Santilli would have just sat on this, or was he always?
Oh, no, he was definitely making his own documentary.
Right.
And I think, you know, at that point there was no television involved, there was no magazines or newspapers. He was just going to make, because that was the business he was in. Pierre, he was a buyer and a seller. I'll license this and borrow that and let you use this if you let me use that, you know. And you know, I'd written, or I'd started to write, you know, the documentary for him. So, and he did eventually make it as well. And so that to the best of my knowledge, there was no other plan at that point.
Yeah.
And it just took off, you know. So very rapidly, what Ray did, he brought in a chap called Chris Carey, and Chris tried to calm things down somewhat. And I think by this time they'd had some contact from the various television companies that were phoning me, and Chris was brought in to deal with them. You know, Chris was a very well-respected gentleman in the industry, you know, a nice, quiet guy. Yeah. And what they did, Ray and his colleagues, and I had nothing to do with this, they organised a press screening for May the 5th, 1995 at the London Museum. And there was a few UFO researchers invited along. I was, but I had no part in it. You know, I wasn't part of the organising of it at all. So we all turns up at the London Museum. It's packed, several hundred people there. The lights go down, and I'm expecting to see these 4 films that I've already seen, Pierre, on at least segments of each one, if not the whole lot. Yeah. And we didn't. We saw, there was no announcement, no dialogue, or it just boom. And the Alien Autopsy film came on, the one that everyone's seen with the damaged leg. And everybody's looking around thinking, well, why doesn't somebody tell us what's going on? Unbeknown to me, Santilli and his colleague were in the projection booth. They're talking down the microphone, but they'd forgot to switch it on. Right. And they had no idea that it wasn't going out in the theatre, you see. Right, yeah. So at the end of the screening, the lights go back up, and there's no sign of Santilli. He disappeared out of a side door somewhere. And there was a number of people there from the media who cornered me and asking me the questions. And I'm saying, well, it's Santilli you need to ask. I had no idea where he'd gone, Pierre. He'd gone to a local place, and he met up with a number of people there. And, you know, so it moved on from there. And it's then that it started to filtered its way onto the infant that was the internet in those days. Right. You know, there was a thing called CompuServe, and an email had just started. It was dial-up, and when you sent an email, this little post office van used to run across the top of your screen. You know, it used to take forever, but you know, it was faster than sticking it in the post. So that's how it all began. At this stage, there wouldn't have been any film on the internet, would there? It would have just been... No. Yeah. You know, it was just this private screening. Yeah. What we organised for later was every year there'd been a symposium in the Republic of San Marino, which is a small country within the boundaries of Italy. And again, it's a government-sponsored UFO symposium, Pierre. They pay for everything. It's free to attend. So we arranged for half a dozen stills from the film to be shown at the symposium there. I went and talked about it. Chris Carey, Ray's representative, came and chatted about it. And that was the first time anything was seen outside of Ray's office, apart from that private screening. And again, you weren't allowed to take any photographs or anything like that, you know.
Was you in possession of the film, or was Ray Santelli?
No, all I had was the original tent footage he gave me.
Right.
You know, and Chris Carey wasn't happy about that, because when we were in San Marino, for example, I took it with me. We're all in the same hotel, and I said to everyone, look, I'm going to play you this tent footage tonight. And Chris Carey said, no, you're not. So, how can I put this politely?
Why did Chris object to the tent footage?
We'll come to that.
I mean, in my opinion, the tent footage looks fake. I think the second film is a lot better in terms of how it actually looks.
Well, I told Chris Carey to go away, but in a different manner to that. And I asked the hotel if we could play it, but they didn't have a VHS player, so we couldn't see it anyway.
Right.
So that was the end of that. And Ray made his deals with the various television companies. He turned up at our conference in August and showed the film. I mean, the place was packed.
Right.
Yeah. And we had to hire another room and show it all via closed circuit television as well.
Can I just ask, did the tent footage ever become public knowledge, or was that something that once Ray managed to get hold of the better footage, he just kind of like suppressed it and just sat on it?
Well, there's a story about each piece of film. Yeah. Again, he turned up and he showed the autopsy film. There was no photographs allowed because it was going out the following day on television around the world. He took questions from the audience, and he was very polite, And I'll give you an idea how sort of busy we were with that conference. I think it was the day before. I had a lady ring me from Washington, D.C. And she says, can I buy a ticket? I said, we haven't got any. She said, well, I'm coming anyway. So I said, what's your name? So I can't remember what her name is, but I wrote it down. And my wife, Sue, she was on the door checking people's tickets. And I said, if this lady turns up, please try and find her a seat. So anyway, she did. And we had some stewards at the back of the theatre sat down, and they could show people to their seats or where the cafeteria was or whatever. So I got one of them to stand up and let her sit there, And part of the conference as well was also sponsored by Sony Music. They were releasing an updated version of Jeff Wayne's musical War of the Worlds.
It's a great time.
So we got some money out of them, and their rep, he stood at the door giving these CDs away. Upstairs, we had a huge, great replica of the cover of the CD, and we did so we'd press from all around the world there, Pierre, out of the blue, and I charged the press a small fee, and all the money went to Bufora and not to me. Out of the blue, a TV company from China appeared at the door.
Wow. So it really was across the world then.
What was funny, I said, yeah, you can come in and film, but you need to sign this and you need to pay the same as everybody else. They said, oh, we're Chinese, we don't have any money. I said, well, sorry. So they hobbled across the road to the cash point, got the money and come back and gave me it. So we were in the bar that night at the hotel, after the event, and I just gave it to the person behind the bar, and I said, these are all our stewards and speakers. When that money's done, you buy them a drink with it, and that's where it went. Right. But that's how it was, and it was hugely controversial, you might think,
Yeah, I can imagine. You mentioned earlier on about the 3 different films. What are the main differences between the films, and are there any anecdotal stories which are attached to each of the films?
Yeah, well, again, we have the tent footage, which Ray claims that's one of the creatures when they first discovered it. So I put it in a field tent. waiting for it to be shipped to wherever.
I mean, it even looks different, and it's a different model, so it's like that's.
So then you have the 2 autopsy films. Same creature, exactly the same, but a different procedure, medical-wise, is carried out on both. The one that you've seen on TV is darker than the other one, and it runs a few minutes shorter as well.
Yeah, I think you said that you preferred the longer version, which has never been released.
Yeah, it was clearer, it was brighter, and it doesn't go out of focus so much because the camera doesn't go so close. So for me, it was I only ever saw it once, Pierre, but from just looking at it, it appeared visually to be better.
There was a main reason why they pulled it, and it had something to do with the historical accuracy of it. Can you remember this particular point?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. And then, of course, you've got the debris film. So each one is a separate piece of film. Santilli released also a sort of a potted history of his alleged cameraman, who he was, minus his name, of course, some of the things he'd been involved in. Then his story about the alien autopsy. He said there were 3 creatures. One lived for quite a while afterwards. That's why you see 2 filmed and 1. And he said he did another autopsy a few years later, on the one that survived and then died. And then he released labels. So what you have the actual celluloid, the film, on a reel. That goes inside of a metal canister, and the canister goes in a box. And then you have a label over the top of the box to seal it with an official stamp. So what we got were allegedly the labels that were on these boxes and have been flattened out and photocopied. And it gave dates and times and what was supposed to be on it, and I think 3 or 4 of those. But what it did as well, it gave the type of film that was used. And it was Kodak Super XX. So one of the things I'd achieved my goal, Pierre.
Yeah.
The film was out. It went around the world. But then the insults started to come. I was, Santilli is a partner in it all. And, I was being paid tens of thousands. They got that from, at the time, my wife and I were having an extension built on our house. They asked the question, where does Mantle get his money from? He ain't got it. Well, they were right. I didn't have it. But my wife did. My wife, before we met, had her own property, which she'd sold, and we used part of the funds from that to build the extension on our house. We'd got children, we wanted a bit more room. I was Santilli's accomplice, one guy called me. Right. So I took it personally, and I thought, Now, I expected, Pierre, once it went out around the world, that info would start to come in sooner or later.
Sure, yeah.
And somebody might say, that's me. I'm one of the actors.
At this stage, was there any indications that it might be a forgery, or were you erring towards just neutrality, or were you now beginning to think that there could actually be a story?
The stance I took, right or wrong, Pierre, I got to know Santilli in the intervening months. And I soon found out that if you sort of attacked him or questioned him harshly, he would just forget you. He wouldn't answer. For example, I arranged for Stanton Friedman to meet him briefly in London. And then Stanton faxed him a list of demands. And Santilli just says, who does he think he is? This is my film and I'll do with it as I want, as I please. And of course, he never replied to him. So what I did, rightly or wrongly, in public and in private with Ray, I supported him 100%. Yeah. But behind the scenes, I was just trying to find out what was going on. Sure. And I worked with a number of colleagues because I wasn't the only one to see these films. My colleague Maurizio Baiata from Italy had seen them. Colin Andrews had seen them, and the late Reg Presley. So there was 4 or 5 of us had seen all of this.
At this stage, what was before us stance on the film? Was it neutral?
Well, they were livid. They were livid, Pierre, and even though I'd explained to them what was going on and what was happening, they weren't happy, that it was going to be shown at their conference,
Why wouldn't they be happy? Because obviously this is something like what you said, that you have to ascertain its authenticity, where it's originated from. So these are all pertinent questions. You would think that Bufora would be the first organisation which would want to examine this, rightly or wrongly, in order just to get an answer.
Well, it fell in our lap.
Yeah, exactly.
And either we handled it or someone else would. You know, for example, one of the biggest critics at the time was my old friend, the late Graham Birdsall, who used to, own and publish UFO magazine. He was livid. And so he took a negative stance.
Angry at you or more angry at Santelli?
Well, I'm pretty sure if it had fallen in his lap rather than mine, right, then his attitude might have changed a little bit. He might have gone from negative to neutral,
Okay.
But Unbufora got a lot of press out of it. They got a substantial amount of money that they made at the conference. Nothing from Santilli, of course. And I just, they weren't happy. But, when I took over their conference as organizer, Pierre, it was on the understanding that I had a free hand and I did it my way, because I'd already been doing conferences before that and they were successful.
I mean, you'd be completely foolish to turn away such an opportunity, even if there was a feeling that perhaps this could be a hoax, just because it's so important, and it's important just to get to the bottom of it. And I also think that how could it do the organisation any damage? Because it generates interest in the subject.
Any damage? It didn't do any. People were worried that it might damage the subject. Well, it didn't.
Probably quite the opposite. It probably
absolutely. There was a well-known. I'll give you an example. There was a well-known author in the country, and she complained about it. And then I later found out that the book she had out at the time, they had to reprint it because they'd sold that many more copies. And I said, well, are you going to donate your royalties to charity then? That was the kind of interest this film generated.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
And people tend to forget that.
And I think it came out at the right time as well, because culturally there was the X-Files, and so there was a big interest in this type of...
Yeah, and we were also running, although it was 1995, we're only 2 years off, the 50th anniversary of Roswell. So off it ran, and I remember having lunch with Santilli in London one day, and I said, look, Ray, I'll get to the bottom of this, no matter what it is. And he just said, that's fine, Philip, do you want another coffee?
In the early days, because I mean, obviously looking at the films now, and he talks about that the films have been restored, and he's always got that sly smile as that you just know he's lying. But in the early days, was he like that, or was he a very convincing liar, or was there always something that you just felt, he's not really telling me the full story?
Well, what I realized right from the beginning, if this was a fake, then he hasn't faked it. Because Ray never made anything original in his life.
No.
He was a buyer and seller,
Yeah.
And he'd say, we made this album. Well, it was an album of 60s pop groups, and it wasn't the original. They got them in and re-recorded it. So I often wondered at that point whether Ray had bought this film
from his contacts.
From whoever.
Yeah.
I wasn't really bothered whether it was fake or genuine. Decided to run with it, but in reality, maybe he'd been swindled.
Yeah.
That was one idea. There was another idea that perhaps this was the outtakes from some sci-fi film, or it was a disinformation film by the authorities, whoever the hell they are. Yeah. And of course, it's fake. A lot of people just said it's fake. Yeah. So, but I was determined, because it became so personal, Pierre, and the accusations that were leveled at me. I thought, I'll find out.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I was naive. I thought it wouldn't take that long once it was, because it goes out on television. Santilli's got his money. So it didn't matter if a week later somebody stepped forward and said, hey, hang on a minute, that's me. He's already got his money in the bank, So, when it went out in America on Fox, Bob Kiviat produced the show Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. It was so popular, Pierre, that the network ordered Bob to do 2 more specials on it, like extended editions. And I think it was the biggest selling documentary on video that year.
I mean, was you a busy man because of your connections to the case?
Oh, absolutely. My phone never stopped. I'll give you, for example, when we showed the film at our conference in Sheffield, there was a gentleman there. He'd got a little pop group of some description in another venue on campus that night, and he said, "Can I hand some leaflets out?" Of course you can. And he said to me, "How big is your team that's working on this, Philip?" I said, "You what?" I said, "There's me and my wife."
Right.
And he says, "Who else?" I said, "There's nobody else." And then he contacted me shortly afterwards. And he wanted me to do a presentation at a West End theatre for a whole week. And it was like Panto season, you know, twice on Saturday and twice on Sunday.
Right.
And he would pay me for it, and he'd pay my expenses and a hotel. And I said, "I can't do it." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I have to go back to work on Monday. I work in a factory." He thought I actually did this kind of thing for a living. And, you know, he was offering me a nice fee, Pierre. You know, I've got two young children. It would have been very nice, but my day job was working in a factory. And I had to go back on the following day, you know. So that's how it all kicked off, mate. It really did.
It is quite an amazing story, and it's very interesting that you were right at the centre of it and you knew all the key players. So, I mean, it was such a vast subject, and in terms of just how did you begin to research it to the point where you were beginning to find players in terms of who had acted in it, who had directed it? Because I know that you found the director, Spiros.
The first thing we did to Santilli, of course, is give us a bit of film to analyse.
And that never came.
They give out scraps of film that were absolutely useless, Pierre, because they didn't have any images on it.
No.
So then we looked at the film itself. You know, is there anything on this film that can tell us anything? You know, is there something on it that wasn't around in 1947, for example, that would give it away? So we checked all the artifacts on it. There's a phone on the wall with a curly flex. Somebody thought you couldn't get a curly flex in 1947. Well, you could. You just had to pay a bit extra for it. You know, it didn't come as standard, but they were around. The clock on the wall, the microphone that's hanging down, the medical instruments, all that was circa 1947. So the next was, right, let's show the film to the medical profession. Because this is supposedly a medical,
you
know, this is an autopsy. And we showed it. When I say we, I mean we, me and colleagues in different parts of the world, including Russia, you know. Now, so what we forget, at that very same conference in 1995, we had the first and only two Russian scientists come and lecture about UFOs in the UK. And it was Dr. Yuri Platov and Dr. Sergei Shinov from the Academy of Sciences in Moscow.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
And of course, they went back to Moscow, and they, you know, ended up with a copy of the film and showing it there and debating it. They showed it to medical professionals there. So the medical profession was pretty much divided, Pierre, if I'm honest. Some said, yeah, it looks like an autopsy, but not done by a professional autopsy guy, perhaps just a sort of general surgeon. Others said, nah. Then we showed it to the special effects industry. Every single one of them pretty much said, yeah, I could make that. Well, that's what you would expect them to say, you know?
Yes, promoting the
what I did, I got one special effect guy in the UK, and I said, well, if it's who made it then? He said, I don't know. It looks like so-and-so's work. So have you got so-and-so's phone number? Yeah. I'd ring the next one. I don't know. Looks like, and I went round and round in circles.
Were there any rumours within the industry in terms of who may have made it?
Not at all. None.
Not at all.
No. I mean, I spoke to I don't know how many, and the same name never cropped up twice, Pierre.
Right.
You know, so there was nothing. So what do we do next? So again, I decided, rightly or wrongly, to run with it, and in public say, yeah, I think it's authentic. You tell them, Ray, you know. And bit by bit, Ray would tell me little things here and little things there. But, you know, Ray...
Sorry, at this point, was you erring towards the possibility that the film might actually be real, or was you just trying to get Ray's confidence so that you could research the film?
Well, what happened was, when we showed it to the special effects guys, there was a company in America called A Really Dangerous Company. What they did, they literally looked at the film frame by frame, and they sent a list of little tiny hints or mistakes, and you literally had to watch it exactly where they told you and at what time to see these. So they were looking at it with a professional special effects eye. One little thing, for example, is when they're sawing the head open, the head wobbles, and the other assistant has to put his hand on it to keep it still. Well, if it's attached to the neck by a spinal cord, it won't wobble like that. Another thing is, if it's a real dead body, then it should be flat on the underside, because when you die and they put you on a mortuary table, all your bodily fluids drop to the lowest point. So dead bodies end up with a flat bum and flat legs or whatever's touching the, well, this thing wasn't, it was rounded, i.e. looked like a mold or a model. But these were hints, Pierre. There wasn't anything definitive that could say, aha, we've got you, look at that.
Yeah.
He's wearing a digital wristwatch. And there was nothing. But that was the first hint.
Yeah.
So
was that the first break in the case almost? That
yeah,
we're hearing towards the fact that this could be
so I started to look into why this other film hadn't been used. Never, it didn't go out in any of the TV programs. And the tent footage, for example, I asked, and Santilli said, well, we decided to pull it because the cameraman wasn't, he couldn't really remember much about it. He wasn't sure about it. So we asked them to pull it. The tent footage had been sold along with the autopsy and some of the debris film to Fox. That was part of the sale. That was part of the package they bought. And they went ballistic when almost at the 11th hour, Santilli said, no, you got to pull it, So they weren't happy. So there was something that didn't add up there. Why would you pull it?
Yeah, my opinion on this is that when I looked at it, I just thought, well, you can see the hands and the feet, and the hands and the feet look human, and also the head of the alien is a different contrast, which looks like it's a type of model or a mask which has been attached to a person's body. So when I was looking at that, my feeling was that there was a person underneath the sheet, and as it turned out,
that's exactly what there was. But what I was looking at was at the two men, the two doctors.
Right. Okay.
You could see their faces.
So you thought that obviously, if it was fraudulent, that he wouldn't take such a risk, so there was the possibility that this was...
Hence, Chris Carey didn't want me to show it to everyone at the symposium in San Marino a few months earlier. But if you look at the autopsy film, the doctors in there have got these hazmat suits on with a little slit for their eyes.
Yeah.
You can't see the face. And there's a window at the back, and there's a gentleman stood behind there. He's got a mask on.
Yes.
He have a mask if he stood behind the glass. So again, I'm thinking, right, this film's out in the open now, or at least some of it is. I'm sat waiting, and it was like tumbleweed. I'm busy in all other areas showing it to, special effects guys and doctors and surgeons, but there was no whistleblower, nothing. So we tried to look into the alleged cameraman, and Ray gave out several names, none of which, came to anything. So we move further in time now, Pierre, some time goes past, and I get an email. We're talking a couple of years here, out of the blue, from a gentleman called Keith. And he says, I know something about the alien autopsy film, Philip. Oh, great, what do you know? I know who made it. Great, give me your phone number. He did. So I rings Keith up, and it's a chap called Keith Goodyear. Now, Keith, worked in the video industry doing various things. And he'd seen the alien autopsy on television, he was just passing. He wasn't really interested. It was just seen it. And he went to try and get some work at a company called AK Music. And they were in Milton Keynes at the time. And he says, while I'm there, Philip, the telephone rang. And the boss, who was Keith, he's another Keith, he's talking on the phone. And the gentleman on the phone is Ray Santilli. So Keith puts the phone down and we're chatting. And I said to him, is that the Santilli? And he says, what do you mean, the Santilli? He says, the man with the alien autopsy film. And he says, he fell about laughing. And he says, he didn't make it, we did. So A&K in AK Music was for Andy and Keith. And the co-owner was Keith Bateman. And what he told me was, that they had made the tent footage. Not the autopsy film you've seen on television, but the tent footage. What Keith Bateman went on to tell me, it took me a while to squeeze it out of him, but he said, we used to work on occasion with Ray Santilli. You know, we were on a friendly relationship. We used to have these crazy sort of brainstorming sessions. And he says, we're all chatting away one day, laughing and joking. Santilli says, wouldn't it be great if we had some Roswell footage? Keith even thinks Santilli may have even been out to Roswell. He's not sure. But he says, one of my employees by the name of Philip Yarman, and I've interviewed Philip, just happened to have a UFO book, and part of it was about Roswell. So Santilli went off home. Keith's a delightful guy. He's as funny as the day is long. You know, he's got mischief running through his veins, as Keith. So Keith went, I've got an idea. He went off to a farm in Bedfordshire, and made what you see as the tent footage. And you're right, there is someone lying underneath the cloth. That's Keith's son. The head is made out of one of those polystyrene wig things, but it's just enlarged the eyes. The two doctors, you know, one of is actually the local butcher, so that's where they got the giblets from. Another is one of Keith's employees, and the man who walks in front of the camera every now and again is actually the farmer.
Do you think at this stage that there was perhaps an intention of making money, or was it almost like a personal joke that they'd been talking?
I mean, Keith liked to joke, but he liked to make money as well. I'll tell you about him in a moment. So Keith takes this tent footage to Santilli and says, we've got some Roswell footage. He knew he'd made it, you know.
Yeah.
Santilli says, that's rubbish. You know, go away and get me a quote for something better, something clearer. So Keith came back with a quote, and Santilli said, no, that's too much. But he kept the tent footage. He kept it. So the idea was there already.
Yeah.
Now, just to give you an idea what Keith was like, this was an era when the karaoke videos were going well, but another thing that was selling well was Keep Fit. So you'll get the latest celebrity, she'd be on the TV selling her latest Keep Fit video. So Keith thought, I need one of these. So he had the idea of getting a Keep Fit video done, but the people in it were actually naked.
Right.
So they're doing the whatever movements naked. It's
Right.
not pornography, they were just doing the movements.
Yeah.
And he made it. And he showed it to a colleague, and his colleague said, Keith, you cannot release that. And he said, why? He said, well, it's not because they're naked. It's because the actual movements they're doing are not correct. Somebody could get hurt if you sat at home watching that and trying to replicate that. It's not correct. So Keith had spent, I don't know, several £1,000s on this by now. So I thought, well, that's my money down the drain. So what Keith did, he got in touch with the News of the World. And he told them this story where he'd been overseas and he'd phoned his producer up and said, I want a new Keep Fit video. And he said, but the line was so bad, he thought I said nude. And we've ended up with this nude Keep Fit video that's totally useless. And he sold thousands of them as a result when I went in the News of the World. And he laughed his head off. You know, he laughed his head off. So that's the kind of environment that the alien autopsy grew out of, you know. Yeah. And we all know that the Cannes Film Festival in France. Well, Cannes actually has a TV festival as well. And Santilli and Keith and others used to go to that every year. And when they got up to the airport, they'd hire a car to the hotel. And they used to race at the end of it back to the airport when they were going home. And they'd pull out all the stunts to try and stop the others getting it. I mean, they told me about, you know, plugging Santilli's his exhaust pipe with toilet roll and, you know, gluing his petrol cap in so he couldn't fill it up with petrol and stuff like this, you know. So these were the kind of, they're lovely guys, don't get me wrong, but, you know, they've got a wicked sense of humour and devilment running through them. And Santilli was no different. So, you know, Keith tells me this story. So I confronted Santilli with it and I published it. I was working with a gentleman by the name of Tim Matthews at the time. And Santilli just more or less said, "No." He said, "What actually happened, Philip, was I had some film. The cameraman had told me that, you know, there's some tent footage on this film, and I gave it to Keith Bateman and his company to transfer onto video for me. And unbeknown to me, the film was damaged beyond repair. And they came back with the VHS of the tent footage telling me that was what was transferred. And I only found out at the last minute that they'd actually conned me." Keith is saying, "He's telling lies, Philip, he's telling lies, you know." But again, we couldn't prove it one way or the other, you know. So the tent footage was fake.
It was good, yeah.
And it was up to you whether you believed Keith Bateman or Ray Santilli, you know. So that was one down.
Yeah.
We got a foot in the door.
Yes.
So we move on. And again, what I would continue to do, Pierre, is try and keep the film in the public domain. I can't remember what year it was now. I think it's somewhere around 2003. Graham Birdsall's UFO magazine is still going strong. It's on the newsstands. And I wrote an article for him about the alien autopsy. And he put it on the front cover. And again, I guess this mysterious email, not from Keith, but from a chap called Simon, pretty much saying something similar to Keith. You know, I didn't realise there was still any interest in the alien autopsy film because it wasn't on television or anything like that, Pierre. And so I get Simon's telephone number, and he says, "My friend made the dummies."
Right.
I said, "Okay, good story, but it's still a story." So we arranged to meet, myself, Tim Matthews, and this gentleman, Simon, in Manchester. It was just in a coffee bar. He picked it. Wasn't far from the train station, so we met there, and then he turns out, I have no idea who this guy is. All I know he's called Simon. And he tells me, he says, "My best friend made the dummies for Ray Santilli." And he wanted to know if there was any money available. I said, "Well, we haven't got any money, you know." He said, "Could television be interested?" I said, "Possibly." The only guy I know that might be was the chap who made Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, Bob Kivier. I kept in touch with Bob. I'm still in touch with him now. Yeah. So I introduced them. And Bob ended up, but before this guy went away, he left a little bit of information. I think it was a slip of the tongue, Pierre. Right. He said that his friend had worked on a show here for Channel 4 that was called Max Headroom. Now, this is back in the 80s. Basically, Max Headroom was a head of a fella who, you know, I don't know, talked.
Animated head, wasn't he? It was probably one of the first examples of computer graphics.
That's right, yeah.
It was actually really, really well done. I was very surprised that the quality of graphics for the mid-80s. Yeah, so we got an idea of who it might be. But we left, you know, we'd introduced Bob, we thought we'd leave into it. And Bob's literally in discussion with this gentleman and his representative. And they're almost at the point where a deal was going to be signed, when this chap was going to tell him everything, and we're going to do a little documentary about it, and that's the end of it. And his representative said, "I'm sorry, you know, we can't do it. That's it, finished." And what had happened was, this gentleman was a sculptor, and he's called John Humphreys, originally from the Manchester area, but he now lived down south. And he'd signed up to work on a movie. That was it. End of story. He wouldn't answer any phone calls or emails or anything like that, which was frustrating, you know. And just by chance, again, I was working for a small publisher in Leeds. My boss knew about my involvement and my interest in the Alien Autopsy film. And she said one day, "I've got my boyfriend coming. We're going to have lunch together. You know, you're all invited." So we're having lunch, and I didn't even know she had a boyfriend. I'd never seen this chap before. And he happened to be a fully trained barrister. But he says, "I don't practice in court. I do contract work."
And he says, "You'll never guess what contract I've got in my briefcase at the moment." "What?" "Do you know a guy called Ray Santilli and his business partner, Gary Shoefield? Well, here's the contract for their movie, Alien Autopsy."
Right.
They'd approached him to check the contract over and make sure it was all kosher and what have you. And he just let me read it. I wasn't allowed to take copies or anything like that. So I met Santilli and Gary Shoefield for the last time. I think it was 2006. The movie was just about to, to come out. And I met them at like an old-fashioned gentleman's drinking club near to where their offices were. And we're chatting away, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I know how much you're getting paid for the movie." "No, you don't." So I told him.
Right.
And I said, "I know the budget for the movie." "No, you don't." "Yeah, I do. It was X." And they were astonished, absolutely astonished.
I mean, did that just, your meeting with the barrister, I mean, was that just absolutely a coincidence?
Absolutely. We didn't even know our boss had a boyfriend.
Right.
And she lived in Leeds, he lived in London.
Yeah.
He was coming up, I assume, on business.
When you say your boss, what do you mean by your boss?
Yeah, I worked for a small publisher. She was called Heather.
Okay.
And Heather ran this little, there's only 4 or 5 of us worked there.
Was it UFO related, or was it different books?
It was, no, we were going to publish UFO books and various other things. There were different things in the pipeline as well. And we had lunch with this gentleman. I can't remember his name now. But,
Yeah.
And he just said, "Hey, have a look at this."
Have a look at the contract.
And it was amazing. You know,
he probably wasn't allowed to show you the contract because.
Well, I don't know. Santilli and Shoefield are sat there, and they said, "What else do you know about us?" So I lied. And I said, "I know a lot more about you two than you can imagine."
And they would take it hook, line, and sinker because.
Absolutely. But what happened there again, Pierre, Ray Santilli said, "Well, I've got something to show you." So he gets out of his bag, sort of a saucer-shaped piece of perspex or glass or plastic, and in it there are several strips of film with the creature on it.
Right.
This is it. So we're in this, this darkly lit gentleman's club. Nice place. I said, "Can I take it outside to photograph it?" He says, "Of course you can, Philip." So I takes this thing outside, holds it up to the light, takes a couple of photographs, takes it back, gives him it back, and he says, "Never thought, Philip, you could have run off with it while you were out there."
Right.
The thought never entered my head, Pierre, and I thought, he's right, I could, And what I did, we found out the film company making the Ant and Dec film, Alien Autopsy, were a company called QWERTY Films. And I emailed them, and I got in touch with one of the executives, a lady, and I basically didn't ask her anything about the film, Pierre. I said, "I know you can't tell us anything, so I'm not going to ask." And I said, "I'm just wanting to put myself in a position that when you are able to tell us things, can we get an interview or an exclusive or whatever?" She's fine. And this went on for a few weeks. And then one day, it was just a throwaway question. I said, "Oh, by the way, one question I do have for you, who's doing your special effects?" She says, "Oh, it's John Humphreys. He's making the dummies for us, and he made the dummies for Ray Santilli." And she put this in an email, and it was just a throwaway comment. I meant it. I was hoping she'd bite, and she did.
Yeah.
So we got confirmation that Humphreys was doing the special effects, and then she went on to say, "And he made the dummies for Ray Santilli." That is the reason why Humphreys had stopped communicating with Kiviat, because he'd signed up to work on the movie. So he couldn't say anything. It's at this stage, Pierre, that Santilli's story changes.
It becomes a restoration now.
Yeah, originally he said, "All the film you see is all we have. This is it all." I didn't want it all because I'd seen more of it. He said, "But no, what really happened was in the 18 months from me meeting the cameraman to getting the film in my hands, it had deteriorated. It were all right for nearly 50 years in this old fella's basement, but somehow it miraculously went, it melted in those 18 months. And he said, I were only left with scraps of it. So we had to restore it.
You just on an interesting anecdote here. I did read, I think it's in Frank Scully's book, Frank Scully's famous book now on flying saucers. It was the second book written on flying saucers in the 1950s in America. And he mentioned that with the military, that when they filmed these objects, that they would use a special film which was treated with a chemical. And when you played back the film, if it wasn't treated with a special chemical before you played back the film, then once it played back, the film would deteriorate. And it's just probably a coincidence, but that kind of does fit with what Santelli is saying. Not as though I trust Santelli, because it is so obvious, because he just lies at every...
Yeah, he says now it's a restoration.
Now a restoration.
And he said, because we've only got scraps of film, it was based pretty much on his memory and what the cameraman could tell him. So he said he assembled a small team to restore it. The actual frames are inserted in the... But there's one thing that sticks out here, Pierre, is if it was a restoration, why did he have to make 2 autopsy films, both of which are different?
Yeah. No, that's
if you're restoring, let's assume you're a painting restorer.
Yeah.
And you know, the Mona Lisa, probably the most famous painting in the world, needs some kind of restoration, and they hire you to do it, Pierre. You don't think, I'll make another one just in case I bugger this one up, you know? And not only will I make another one, I'll put her a real cheesy smile on it, and, you know, maybe she'll have some bigger boobs, and I'll do it with blonde hair, you know?
At the end of the day, the best he could say was it was a recreation of something that he'd claimed that he'd seen, but no one else had seen.
That's not what he said. It was a restoration.
No, I know, and that's what he says throughout. And
I think he had to say that in order to sell it to the film company. It was a get-out clause for them as well.
Absolutely. And it's so obvious when he's talking about this as well, and he's saying it's a restoration, and he's smiling, and you just know that he finds it really amusing, the whole scenario.
Yeah. So, you know, hey presto, it's now gone from being all the real film to a restoration. And the Ant and Dec film came out. It's okay, is the film, you know.
It's fun. It's entertaining and fun.
Yeah, and he made a lot more money out of it, you know, yet again. But also there is another film. There is a 5th piece of film. In the early days, Santilli was put under a lot of pressure to say, where's this mysterious cameraman? Let's speak to him. Now, he arranged for somebody to phone me, and one night I got a phone call from a gentleman with an American accent. I have no idea who the hell it was, you know. And same as a chap called John Purdy, who was the producer of the Channel 4 documentary that they were making. I think he had a conversation with somebody with an American accent. But so what happened was, producer Bob Kiviat set out a list of questions. And the idea was they would sit the cameraman down in front of the camera, and he would just answer these questions. And they provided a video of this old boy with glasses on, and you know, and it was delivered to Kiviat, and it was fake. You know, Kiviat knew it was fake as soon as he looked at it, because again, the room is dark, but it was filmed on video, so all you got to do is turn the brightness up on it, you can see this fella. And it was a stone cold fake, you know. And they laughed it off as if it was, you know, oh, well, you asked us for one, we gave you one. It didn't matter that it was a fake. So when we talk about the Alien Autopsy film, Pierre, we're talking about 5 different pieces of film, you know, all under that umbrella.
I mean, isn't the story that he was actually a homeless person? And
well, the story behind it is the movies come out, and a colleague of mine by the name of Russell Callahan, we'd spoken to Humphreys, or rather Bob Kiviat had, and before he said goodbye, he said, it's not me you need to speak to, it's Spiros. Now, that meant nothing to us. So I have a colleague by the name of Russell Callahan. Russ used to work on UFO magazine. He was Graham Birdsall's son-in-law. But at this point, Russ was running his own small magazine called UFO Data. And we'd been and interviewed Keith Bateman and a couple of others, and Russ put out a little DVD. Anyway, he gets a phone call out of the blue. And this chap says, I'm the man behind the Alien Autopsy film.
Wow, amazing.
So Russell says, well, you know, it's not me you need to speak to, it's Philip. So I got his phone number and I called him. got my tape recorder running, and hey presto, his name was Spiros Malaris. And as soon as I started speaking to Spiros, he started to fill in all the gaps. I mean, right off the bat,
Right.
you know. So I stopped the conversation, you know, I recorded it, played it back and wrote some questions down. I rung him again. He answered the questions. And again, I said, yeah, great story, but
Can you prove it now?
can you prove it? So I was invited down to his home near London, again, along with my wife. I met his partner and her daughter. And he said, here you go. And he showed me, for example, his diaries from the date. You know, meeting with Santilli, drawings that he'd done of the Spiros was trained as a motor mechanic when he was a young man, but his real passion was, one was filmmaking, the other was magic. So he is a professional magician. He's also a filmmaker.
Put the two together. He's
also a very good artist in his own right, you know. Wow. So he pulls out he said, Santilli told me this fantastic story. So he painted his own storyboard, not little sketches, you know, full-size paintings. So it tells the whole fake story. He had
going to be directed.
Yeah, he had faxes from Kodak telling him what edge codes the film would have to have. He had a big pile of photographs, for example, of American military trucks. I said, what the hell you got them for? He said, we were even going to make another piece of film with President Truman on. Because Ray at one point said he could see President Truman on the film so clear you could see his lips move. So we're going to get an actor and put the prosthetics on and build a flying saucer in the background and just build one end.
Yeah.
The military truck. You could do it in 2D, but it would look like 3D. You only need the back end. And I was going to use this one here. You see the number plate? I was going to put that number plate on it. You go check that number plate at the archives, it'll turn out to be real. He said, but we run out of money, time and money, you know, we weren't able to do that. And he told me the whole story.
Wow.
Now, how he became involved, again, is quite by accident. Now, at the time, going back to 1995, Spiros had you know, his own little film crew, would make pop videos, you know, promos, whatever. He too was going to the film festival in Cannes. And he got a trade directory out and he looked for some companies that were close to him and he faxed them. He said, we're going to be in Cannes over these dates. We've got some time on our hands, so if you need a film crew, we're there. And that's where he met Ray Santilli. And Santilli tells him this story about this mysterious cameraman buying this film. Same rubbish he told me, you know, a couple of years before. So Spiros goes to meet him when they go back home. He goes to Santilli's office. He puts on the tent footage. Spiros says, that's never been shot on film. That's rubbish. You know, and he laughed at it. So, you know, Santilli said, oh, well, me, I paid for this film and I've been conned, you know, spent a lot of money on it. So, again, Spiros has got a terrific sense of humour. And to be a magician, he's got that, you know, that sense of mystique as well. So he drives away. Just so happens that Spiros's best friend is the sculptor John Humphreys. So he phones John, tells him the story. He said, I've got an idea, John. Why don't we make him some autopsy footage?
I bet they were really excited at this point. Because
so he goes back to see Santilli, puts the plan on the table, and Santilli says, yeah. He gets his German colleague, Volker Spielberg, so we get the Spielberg name involved in it, to put up the money. I think it was somewhere around £35,000. At the time, Spiros's sister was having her apartment renovated in London, so they used that to build the set. Didn't matter if they made a mess, it was you know, it had been renovated anyway. Spiros's girlfriend did a lot of the medical research, because again, no internet, so it was books, reference libraries, you know. They hired, because he already was a little film crew, he knew where to get props from. But what they did, they hired props from different companies and had them delivered to different addresses. So there was no paper trail. to one
Very clever.
particular. And he said there couldn't be old props; they'd have to look new. You know, we couldn't be using something out of a museum that's got rust all around it.
So I really did have the
that.
contacts to be able to make this film and to do a really good job
Yeah.
of it. And I mean, it really is a pretty decent film.
Well, this is where the other Autopsy film comes in. The other one,
yeah,
is actually the first one they filmed. And when they looked at it back, it was Spiros's girlfriend. Bearing in mind she'd done all the medical research, she said, "You've done that wrong. If you release that, the medical profession will know immediately that that's incorrect." So they thought, that's it. Santilli's got his head in his hands. They've used all the money up.
Yeah.
So Spiros says, "Don't worry. I'll pay for the next one making. I'll pay the crew and everybody. We've already got the mold for the dummies. We'll just make another one. Set, do it overnight." So they reset it, come back the next day, and there's a fault with that. There's actually an air pocket. There's a hole in the leg. So they improvise. They go to the butchers. They get some bones. They stick that in. They burn it to make it look like an injury, and they film it again. And hey presto, that is the one you see on television.
So what was Spiros's incentive for doing it, shall we say, properly?
What Spiros says, they signed an agreement not to reveal it,
Right.
But the idea was they would wait 6 or 9 months and then they'd go, da, they'd just reveal it.
Yeah.
And say, look how clever were we. Hopefully, then he'd get some more work as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
John would get some more work as a sculptor, But he said Santilli kept coming back with this sub story about not making his money back. So he said, we just said, forget it, and off they went, about their business.
Which, by the sounds of it, was a complete porky pie, because by the sounds of it, he did actually have deals up his sleeve. Obviously, just because of the interest in the public interest.
Absolutely.
So I find it very difficult that he made no money whatsoever.
Well, he hadn't, he'd made a lot of money.
You're right.
And he just lied.
Yeah.
So Spiros went off. Spiros, even now, he's not interested in UFOs at all.
Yeah.
Wasn't then. He built up his business. He ended up owning a film studio that he would license. The BBC would work there and so on. He's a businessman. He's got, his irons in various fires. Like I said, he's a very, very, very good artist. He also runs his own charity for the homeless.
He's very intelligent, because he, I think he spoke at the conference, didn't he?
He did. Well, I interviewed him and he showed me all his material and asked to speak at our conference, whatever, and he did. And the reason he came forward is when the movie came out, because as far as he was concerned, it was now out in the open that it was a fake. Therefore, he wasn't breaking his agreement.
Yeah,
and what he did, he suddenly looked on the internet and put in alien autopsy, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And the way he found my colleague Russell Callahan, because he looked at all the products that were being made. And of course, one of those little products was Russell's little DVD that he made, So he was contacting people who made products about the alien autopsy film to see what the hell was going on. And that's when he spoke to Russ. And the story was out. So, Spiros, without a shadow of a doubt, Pierre, is the man behind it. He was the one. He didn't come up with the idea initially. That goes back to Santilli mentioning it and Keith Bateman making the tent footage. But for the actual alien autopsy film, had Spiros not met Ray in Cannes, it would never have happened. We'd never have heard about it. And he's been trying to write his own book. But he'll openly admit it. Said, I can fix your car, I can film anything. I'm a magician, but he said the one thing I'm not is I'm not a writer. And his business took precedent. He has started writing a book, so I've read bits of it.
Having listened to him speak, he's extremely articulate. He's obviously bilingual, so he's very, very intelligent. So I would think that if he wrote a book, it would be a very clever book.
Well, I read one particular chapter that deals in part with his relationship with Ray Santilli.
Yeah.
And whilst I can't divulge the contents of it, he asked me my opinion. He said, do you think I've been too hard on him? I said, no, quite the opposite. I think you've been a bit soft on him. He said, well, what I've actually talked about, Philip, is the things that I can prove. There's other things that I know, but I can't prove it. So what you read in that particular chapter, if I'm challenged on any of that, I have the proof, evidence to back it up, you know. Since then, of course, he's gone to the Copyright Office, and he has gained the copyright of the Alien Autopsy film. Because the one you see on television, of course, he paid for. He paid the crew to make it. They've run out of money. So he has a certificate, you know, saying the copyright is his. It's the same on IMDb. They've recognized his ownership. And, you know, again, I'm hoping he'll finish his book, but sadly he was ill with the COVID-19 and in hospital. And that's knocked the stuffing out of him, but thankfully he's on the mend. So the 4-part documentary, like my book, tells the story right from the genesis, from that, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had some Roswell film, right the way through. Tell all the story about Spiros, all the others involved. And then when you think it, you know, you've seen everything, Pierre. As Graham Bursell once said on stage, the Alien Autopsy film is not dead.
No, I don't think it'll ever go away.
Last year, of course, popped up an email list that had been dumped online. It's 11 pages. It was addressed to US billionaire Bigelow, Robert Bigelow, and there's several people copied in on it. There's Dr. Eric Davis, Dr. Hal Puthoff, Dr. Colm Kelleher, and Dr. Christopher Kit Green. And at the time, Bigelow was running his organisation called NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Sciences. So this is going back to 2000, 2001. The rumour is this has come from the late astronaut who died, from his files.
Right. Are you allowed to say which astronaut?
It was the 6th man on the moon.
Okay.
So, but that's just a rumour.
Right.
So, you know, I received this list. This is 11 pages long, and lo and behold, whose name stuck right in the middle of it but mine?
Yes.
You know, I was contacted by Colm Kelleher back in 2000 or whatever, and I put him in touch with Ray, you know. But basically, the whole email thread is checking the comments made by Dr. Kit Green. Kit Green is a medical doctor, and he did work at one point for the CIA. And it's all about the alien autopsy. At one point, Kit Green says that in 1987/88, he was shown the same, in capital letters, film at a briefing at the Pentagon. So he was shown the exact same film that you see in the alien autopsy.
Which, of course, was impossible.
Impossible.
Yeah.
He then goes on to give his own medical opinion about the alien autopsy film that we see on television. And he then sort of rounds it all off, saying he spoke with some of Santilli's PR guys and found them to be a bit dim and not very pleasant.
Right.
So there's a number of problems here. Of course, he couldn't have seen the same film.
No.
And he got his own medical opinion. He spelt it out again in capital letters. The alien autopsy film is real.
Yeah. What's your opinion on this?
Well, again, with the PR guys, like I've told you, this is 2000, 2001. Santilli didn't really have any PR guys. Well, not in 95 anyway. So there are problems. He can't have seen the same film. He was interviewed by an American researcher who I'm not going to name. And he changed his opinion. He changed his mind now. He thought it was fake now. But he said, well, it wasn't the same film, but bits of the film I was shown were the same as the alien autopsy film. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Green, or Dr. Green, but whether its bits are the same or the whole damn thing's the same, it cannot be either way.
No, it can't.
You know? And there's another gentleman, you know, in this email list I contacted. He asked me not to mention his name. He confirmed that the email thread is real, but he has now changed his mind. You know, why the hell they were talking about it 6 years after it was shown on TV? I really don't know, Pierre.
Yeah, I've got an idea about this. It's just because I've investigated something called the Roswell Artifact. And with the Roswell Artifact, the military actually copied genuine objects which were said to have derived from flying saucers. So I'm just actually wondering whether Ray Santelli, Spiros, or Humphreys, whether they had access to actual real alien bodies, and the film itself was commissioned by someone who was in the circle of knowledge. And therefore, if Dr. Green had actually seen the video, then superficially, if he did not have been paying attention, he may have thought, I've seen that creature, because the creature was made to actually look like the alien. And maybe the intention behind that would be that if the military thought that somebody had some footage of Roswell, they were thinking that if somebody released it, then at any time they could just totally discredit it by discrediting the Santelli film. I mean,
well, I look at it in a much different vein.
Yeah, what's your perspective?
Well, the way I look at it was, you know, these gentlemen were being paid by Mr. Bigelow. And for some reason, you know, they've looked into the alien autopsy film and have come back and said to him, bear in mind, this is, you know, he's the boss, it's real. The way I look at it is, well, they're going to say it's real, they're not going to tell him it's fake, because they want to keep the paycheck going. Not about the alien autopsy film, but about all the other stuff they're involved in. You know, you don't want to tell the boss that something is fake. You know, you tell him it's real and we'll carry on, you know. But we can't do anything about it because the people we deal with are dumb, they're rude, you know, they're not very nice, you know, and we'll move on to something else. But what Kit Green did say is that he got about 12 autopsy films delivered to him at one point, only one of which he took serious. That turned out to be a deformed human, you know.
Right.
But so, I mean, in no disrespect, there is no way that the CIA or any government agency was involved, because we've traced it right back to Keith Bateman and his colleagues, and with the best will in the world, Pierre, they're lovely guys.
Yeah.
But they're as far away you can get from any intelligence agency as you want to.
Yeah.
You know?
And the tent footage was, well, it wasn't actually very good, not compared to the second and the third footage of the alien, which was professionally commissioned and produced.
So I managed to get a quote or two out of Kit Green for my book, which is in there. He's a very difficult man to pin down. He didn't want to commit himself, wouldn't say things, very evasive, you know. And I said, I just want to know the truth. I'm not after anything, you know, anyway. You know, so that's the way I look at it. He just didn't want to tell the boss it was fake. And we'll keep the boss sweet, keep the paycheck rolling, which will allow us to do our research. And of course, some of these gentlemen mentioned in this email list are now part of the To the Stars Academy.
Right.
So the same people who were telling their boss that the alien autopsy is real are now working for another organization somewhere else. So, you know,
Needing all kinds of information.
Yeah, but, you know, when we go right back to the alien autopsy film when it was released, Santelli had strokes of luck as well, Pierre.
Yeah.
For example, one of the statements was, well, if it was secret military film, you could never get it out of America. Just so happened, at the time, not in America, but here in the UK, there was a chap went on a car boot sale, and he bought some old videotapes, supposedly were blank, and he takes them home, puts them in his VHS player. What's on them was top secret training of the SAS, and that got into the newspapers, you know.
Yeah.
When we look at the film that was supposedly used, because we've got these labels printed out, and it says Kodak Super XX. We got in touch with Kodak, and they've looked in their archives, got one of their old manuals out, and there's a list of all the films they had on sale. They're Super XX, and then you look in the columns beyond that, Pierre, and it tells you what its recommended use was. Super XS, its recommended use was indoors under subdued lighting. Well, what is the alien autopsy if it's not indoors under subdued lighting? And that added up. Then it was, well, it would have been filmed in colour. So again, we goes to Kodak, and they said in 1947, there was actually a shortage of colour film. Up until that point, the military had first shot at it, but that agreement had run out, and they were literally telling their salesmen, because they used to have a publication just for their salesmen, and it was telling them in there that not to sell colour film because there was a shortage of it. I went to the National Archives in America and said, do you have any information on the record of military medical procedures from this era? And they sent me a list of them, and they were autopsies or whatever, and they were all filmed in black and white. Even that seemed to add up. Same with the quality of the film. Again, round about the same time, a piece of film had been unearthed of Winston Churchill visiting the United States during the war, and I believe he was at the top of the Empire State Building, and it looked like it had been filmed yesterday, Pierre, but it had been sat in somebody's basement or whatever since the end of the war.
Was this black and white or colour?
Black and white, and there's Winston, when he's looking around. I think it was the Empire State Building. It was somewhere of importance, and it looked perfect. It really did,
So if the film is looked after properly, then it would survive, basically.
So he had a bit of luck on his side. And when you watch the movie, there's nothing really true in it, apart from how he let the story run. It takes off, and Santilli just goes with it and makes things up as he goes along. And they had a great deal of luck along the way. So there you go.
And I mean, that was just... It became so massive, it became a cultural phenomenon almost, didn't it?
Well,
and
it's just even now, Pierre, the people that still believe it to be authentic.
Yeah.
That Santilli was forced to change his story by, whoever. The Spiros is a paid disinformation agent, but paid by who the hell ever. I don't know what that makes me.
Well, yeah, I mean, these are just rumours, aren't they? And it's like, there's a big difference between actuality and perception. Anybody can make up a story. And I think this also plays into human psychology as well. Human beings are story-making machines. And so this is the problem, isn't it? So with a story like that, it just kind of runs on it as its own kind of after effects, really.
Well, the Alien Autopsy film is now firmly embedded in popular culture as well, Pierre.
Yeah.
When it came out, it was in The Simpsons, Seinfeld, The X-Files.
Yeah.
I mean, last year, I think it was in America, you could buy Alien Autopsy cakes for Halloween. I think it was last year or the year before. There used to be a small UFO museum in Blackpool, believe it or not. It was there for many years, but it had closed. So my wife and I went to see the owner with a view to buying some of the exhibits. He tried to sell me the whole damn thing and to reopen it. I said, David, his name was David Boyle. Sadly, he's died since then. And lo and behold, what does David have on display but his own mock-up of the Alien Autopsy film?
Right.
I tried to buy some of the other things, and before I could buy them, sadly, David died. But so it crops up in the most unlikely of places, and then with the email, that appealed online last year, Santilli, rose like Phoenix-like from the ashes, saying, I told you there'd be documents that would support the authenticity. He's off again.
So the case won't close down.
We move right up to today.
Yeah.
But there is an idea.
Yeah.
To do a mock trial.
With Santilli.
You would have on one side the Spiros Bateman story.
Yeah.
And on the other side you would have the Santilli story.
And then both
similar to there was once a mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, of course.
Yeah.
And of course he never got to court. He was murdered live on television. But they did a mock trial. What would have happened if he'd actually got his day in court? So the idea is to do a mock trial about the alien autopsy, and hopefully you're going to be presenting the evidence then. Well, it won't be me, but he's pitching the idea, and who knows? I mean, can you remember I don't know what the name of the show was, but it used to be a daytime TV show here, where you basically get people up on the stage and they would argue with each other whether that was their child or not.
Kilroy or something like that. Was it daytime TV?
Yeah, and they'd say, well, at the end, when they finished the arguments, they bring the DNA results out.
Right.
So I got in touch with them,
Yeah.
And I said, how about a different argument? How about, and I told them the two opposing stories, Spiros and Santilli. You give them both the lie detector test and you let them tell their story. You reveal the results of the lie detector test and see what happens.
Yeah.
Now, Santilli said, that's great. Spiros was all for it. But I put a caveat in there. And I said, but instead of it being a DNA test, what Santilli has to do is give us a couple of frames of film with the creature on it. We'll have that. We'll hand that to the TV company. They can have it analysed wherever they want. So at the end, you'll say, right, there's your polygraph test, there's yours. But in this envelope is the results of the test on the film. As soon as I mentioned that to Santilli, he didn't want to know.
No chance, yeah.
No chance, you know.
Yeah. Well, again, I think Spiros is much more authentic and he's very articulate. He explains everything. He explains all the details. And the thing with Ray Santilli is he's just always so evasive. And again, even when you watch the interviews and he talks about the restorations, he's always got that smirk on his face as though it's almost like he's not even taking it seriously.
Well, in the documentary series we've made, of course, Ray Santilli does an up-to-date interview.
Yeah.
As I pointed out earlier on, there is a hiccup in his story about it being a restoration. Because if you're restoring it, you don't need two different films.
You don't need two different films, no.
Now, Santilli is asked at some point during his interview, what about the two films you showed Philip? And, you know, all of a sudden he has a memory lapse.
Right.
I can't remember showing two films to Philip, you know. Yeah. And he says that, you know, on the screen. Mm. But when I wrote my book, Pierre, the first thing one of the first things I did was all the people that had seen the films. I knew them all anyway, and said, right, tell me what you saw. You know, so there's my wife Sue, there's Maurizio in Italy, there's Colin Andrews. They all talk about seeing the tent footage and then the two autopsy films and then the wreckage. So, you know, we have it on the record from others that there was two films. But if there's two films, then Santilli's restoration
doesn't make sense.
Out of the window. He's out of the window. Yeah. So, of course, in the recent interview he's done for the series we've made, he suddenly has a memory lapse. He didn't say he didn't show me them.
Yeah.
He says, I can't remember showing. No. You know, he's very vague about it. Yeah. It brings it right up to date. It really does.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And just before we finish this interview, what are you working on at the moment? Have you got new books? Because obviously you're the head of Flying Disc Press.
Yeah, I started Flying Disc Press back in 2015.
Yeah.
I've been sent a manuscript from a colleague of mine in Poland, not to publish. He was just practicing his writing. And a colleague of mine called John Hansen here in the UK was already publishing his own books under the Haunted Sky banners, Haunted Skies.
Right, yeah, this is a massive series of books.
Oh, it's an amazing. And John encouraged me. He said, why don't you publish it, Philip? I'll show you how to do it. You know, so John showed me the way, and I published UFOs Over Poland.
Which is a fantastic book, by the way. I've read it. It's a brilliant book.
Yeah, so I've published a number of things since then from different parts of the world. I am literally in the finishing stages of UFOs Over Italy, UFO Contacts in Italy, Volume 2 by Roberto Pinotti. I published Volume 1 a couple of years ago. This is the second part of it.
Which is a fantastic book also.
Yeah. But here's something different for you. I have already finished. We're not sure what date to publish it yet. By an American researcher by the name of John Steiger. And it's called the UFO Trilogy. Dramas for the Stage. So we actually are going to publish 3 screenplays.
Great.
All for stage plays. And they're all based on real life events. One's based on Roswell. One's based on the Rendlesham Forest incident. The third one is on the Linda Corteo Brooklyn Bridge abduction case.
Right.
So what you've got with Roswell is an inquiry afterwards. Same with Rendlesham, a similar, and the Linda Corteo case is mainly based in the late Bud Hopkins studio. So, but what is interesting, we'd hoped that we maybe get somebody to pick these plays up and make one, or make all 3. just before the lockdown, we had an actor and producer living in Norway want to do at least one of them. So he's translating one as we speak. And I'm hoping to hear any day now from a colleague in Germany who's going to work with a production company in Cologne and have all 3 plays done on the stage. Wow. And then filmed for sale as a film as well.
Can I also ask, because I know that there's lots of amateur dramaticists who would love to put on a UFO stage play. If you buy the book, are you allowed to put on the...
That will be down to the author, you know. Yeah. I would say yes, you know, but that will be down to the author.
So it's wait and see at the moment, yeah.
But yeah, so, you know, these could also be easily adapted to television as well. And of course, on my own, I started to write my own book, another book, back in 2018, but got busy with other things. And this looks at UFO landings in Britain. So it's all UFO landing cases in the UK. It's all but finished.
Right.
I'm just waiting for a couple of things. Then,
is that coming out in this year or next year?
I don't know if it'll be this year or next year, but what I've also been working on is a book for a younger audience, more of a sort of early teen, and it's called Introducing UFOs, a Young Person's Guide. So it's light on reading, it's got a lot of graphics, a lot of documents and photographs. So I'm finishing that, and a UK artist by the name of Ronald Kinsella.
Yes, twin
Kinsella's are twins, I kept them mixed up. Ronald's also an author, but he's a fantastic graphic artist, and Ronald has agreed to work with me on this project, so he'll be producing some unique artwork for this book as well.
Yeah, he is a fantastic illustrator, because I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago. This was his brother, Philip Kinsella. Yeah. But I had the permission to use his brother's artwork, Ronald. Well,
I've got a book by Philip already done. Again, it's just a question of when we publish it. Ronald's got one in the pipeline that I'll be publishing as well. And there's other things in the melting pot, Pierre.
That's absolutely brilliant. I'm glad that everything's working out. I'm very excited about the British contact cases, or the landing of flying saucers, because I don't actually think that's been done yet.
Well, no, what happened, Pierre, when I first started work with the Yorkshire UFO Society back in 1980, one of the first cases I ever worked on was a landing case. And it's from Normanton, which is just down the road from where I live, you know. And I went and we interviewed the lady, myself and Mark Birdsall, and her children. And it always stuck with me. Here's a strange little story for you. Last year, I did a podcast interview with somebody. I can't remember who it was. But I got an email from a lady. I mentioned this Normanton landing case. And I got an email from a lady in New Zealand. And she said, I used to live in Normanton.
Right.
She says, what's the name of the witness? I told her the name. She says, you're joking. That was my best friend's name. She still lives in Normanton. She contacted her best friend. And lo and behold, her best friend was one of the witnesses as a child to this event. She was one of the little kids I interviewed all those years back.
Wow.
And I've been in touch with her, and she gave me a little quote that I'll use in the book. So, you know, what a way to I've run the story in the local press here a couple of times, Pierre, hoping that the children might, because they're grown up now, would come forward, but nothing.
Yeah.
But so that's in there as well, you know, a little update from the very first landing case I ever got involved with. And they've always intrigued me, Pierre, because we know, if we're honest, most UFO sightings have a rational explanation. But these things, when you're up close and personal, that's a different matter. It's not a little light 3 miles in the distance. It could be any damn thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I spoke to this lady, she was called Mrs. Westerman. She's deceased now. She said, Philip.
Westerman.
Oh,
Westerman, okay.
I mean, at that time, Normanton was a coal mining town. I was brought up in a coal mining environment. My dad worked down the mines all his life. The children were playing a ball game. It's the same ball game I used to play when I was a kid. It was one you made up. And yes, she was mystified by what they saw, but she was equally mystified, Pierre, that no one else came forward. This was on a bright sunny day on a weekend. The children were playing out in the sun. As you know, the area, there's a motorway either side of Normanton. It's a busy little town, you know. Nothing, not anything. And that puzzled her as much as to what she saw close up. You know, she didn't see this miles away. They were close up to it. So I always wanted to do something about UFO landing cases, and I've pretty much got it finished at last.
Yeah, are these based upon a lot of the case files that you've just researched over the years then?
They're from my own personal investigations, are some of them, some from my colleagues that I've, you know.
This will actually be a very important historical document, and I think what's really interesting about your company is the amount of research that you're releasing. I mean, you've got cases from Russia, Poland, Romania,
Italy.
And I think what's interesting about it is that these cases haven't been contaminated in terms of how we would generally view the UFO phenomenon. They're very diverse, these cases are. I think after the X-Files, all the cases kind of just became very similar, and I think in the past what you saw was a much more diversity, and so I think that in itself is very interesting.
You're spot on there, Pierre, because, you know, again, I'm not being big-headed. I've been involved a long time, and I think I've just about heard it all. But when I was researching some of these cases, some of them are so bizarre. I mean, you know, there's 3 cases in this book that are so bizarre. They ought to be really episodes of something like Doctor Who, you know what I mean, with a nice logic behind them. And I contemplated whether I should use them or not, because they are so different. You know, but I thought, no, you know, I will use them, and I'll allow the reader to make their own conclusions. But they are, I mean, I went through every publication of the Flying Saucer Review. I went through all Viewforers magazines, books and stuff and papers flying in all directions. It's what I've been doing down the years, of course, Pierre, is putting stuff to one side in a file. Finally digging it all out, and I forgot about that. you know, I wonder where that went.
Going through all your files again. So yeah, I mean, that sounds like a fantastic book. That's something that I'm definitely going to have to read. I mean, I do read most of the books that you release just because I think that the books are very high quality. It's the same with the Japanese UFOs, the Utsu Funny. Again, that was a really very well researched.
Fascinating little book. It really is absolute different. What I tried to do, Pierre, is to publish something different.
Yeah.
But every now and again, like now, we've got a book out by Kevin Randall, which is his favourite cases from Project Blue Book. And we put that out because of the drama series Project Blue Book. I'm not saying it's no good. All I'm saying is it's just not accurate, you know. But then it's not meant to be. It is a drama TV series.
Yeah.
So Kevin is a former helicopter pilot with he's a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, PhD as well. So these are his favourite book cases from Project Blue Book. It's out now.
Isn't Kevin Randall the expert who's known really for the Roswell case?
Absolutely, but Kevin is a professional writer, published over 150 books to his name, all of which are science fiction as well, of course. He's a best-selling author, like you said. And again, it's a fascinating publication, you know, because it's, you know, we're dealing with historical documents here in Project Blue Book. This is not fantasy. So you can read about this, you can go and double check it yourself. It's all there. So it's just something different. You know, Project Blue Book was relevant at the time. Kevin wanted to do this, so hey presto, it is available.
It's complete, yeah. And what's his opinion about most of the cases in Project Blue Book?
Kevin is one of those who supports the extraterrestrial hypotheses. Right. But he's pretty skeptical as well. You know, that may sound, you know, a bit strange, you know, both things in the same sentence, but he is quite skeptical in a lot of occasions. For example, I think it was last year, he did a review of some of the witnesses, if not all of the witnesses, who claimed to have seen bodies at Roswell, alien bodies. And he came to the conclusion that the evidence wasn't as strong as perhaps they first imagined. So a lot of it was second hand or third hand.
Yeah.
And it seemed that getting that tangible evidence was just out of reach.
Speaking to the right person was almost impossible. It was almost, it was somebody's friend of a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, again, I think puts on an interesting slant on the Roswell case, just in terms of that. But I guess it was such a long time ago as well that it becomes more and more difficult to research just because the witnesses are dead.
Well, I think, as far as I'm aware, they're all dead now. There is nobody alive come Roswell, you know. But again, I think, as you know, I've been involved with an abductee over these last couple of years by the name of Calvin Parker.
Yes.
Calvin was a witness to the events at Pascagoula in October 1973.
Very famous case.
I published 2 of his books, and they've sold very well. We've amassed a lot more information. But Calvin, again, told me the story back in, I think it was 1983. He was working at a place in the oil industry. And he made friends with a lady at the local store. She knew who Calvin was. She found out somehow. And she says, I've got this elderly gentleman I want you to talk to. So Calvin said, yeah, all right, you know. He just thought it's some lonely old chap who just needs, somebody to talk to. So she took him to this old boy's house. In they go. And this gentleman is Jesse Marcel Sr.
Right.
The guy who picked up the alleged wreckage of the UFO at Roswell. Calvin had no idea. He knew nothing about Roswell, and he starts telling him the story. So he phoned his pal up, Charles Hickson, who was at the encounter with him in 1973, and he says, yeah, that's the guy. So Calvin goes back and meets him a second time, tells him more of the story about Roswell and what happened and what crashed. He goes back to see him a third time, and the old gentleman, Major Marcel as he became, said, you know what, I kept 3 pieces of the UFO wreckage. I've got them hidden in my water boiler. All you have to do is take the screw off the top and they're there. So Calvin says, can I have a look? He says, yeah. He says, just then there's a knock on the door, and it was, I think, one of the neighbours. So Calvin says, I'll tell you what, I'll come back. Don't worry about it. They're not going anywhere. So Calvin goes home. That night he got called up as such and was shipped offshore to work on an oil rig. And was on the oil rig for months. He came back, but I'll go and see Major Marcel. In the meantime, he died.
Right.
The house is still there. Calvin's told this story now in a new 6-part documentary that's been made. But who knows? Who knows? It's just another part of the Roswell story. A piece of film that came my way a few years back is an interview with a chap called Deputy Sheriff Charles Forgus. He's deceased, but he's filmed on video talking about him and his boss, the sheriff. Their office was at Big Spring in Texas. And he said in 1947, they were looking for a chap who'd been cashing dud checks. And he'd been caught and held in jail in Roswell. So they set off to go and pick this prisoner up. En route, they heard about the UFO crash on the police radio. They changed direction, went to the location, saw the UFO, the creatures, were politely asked to leave. They went and picked their prisoner up and returned back home. And never told us so.
Right. Yeah, this is amazing, isn't it? All these stories which are just beginning to seep out. And I mean, the story about the wreckage actually being hidden in the boiler. I mean, these are really interesting stories. I think what was very interesting about the books that you wrote about the Pascagoula case was that basically you opened it up again, because when I was a kid, it was kind of famous, but there was never more than a paragraph.
Yeah.
And what you did is that you went to America, you interviewed him, you contacted him via email, you got all of these different sources which just didn't exist, and then you got further witnesses just which again confirmed that something incredible happened on the river that day.
Yeah.
And so again, it's almost like that not only are you known for the alien autopsy video or film and the controversy behind that, and researching that, and also opening that up and showing that it was a hoax, but you've also added to our knowledge in terms of the Pascagoula case because of finding all these additional witnesses and writing what are the most comprehensive books on the Pascagoula case. Yep. And also, you're also involved in all these other projects in Romania, Poland, Russia, Italy, which I've read all of those books, and they are fantastic if you really want to study the subject, because there's a lot of books now which are very, shall we say, very samey, but when you read about the Italian cases, or when you read about the Poland and Romanian cases, it injects a lot of life into the subject, and there's a lot of material there which I feel that really needs to be studied, and very seriously studied. And so that's given us a whole new material to look at, and I think that that in itself is important.
Expanding Flying Disc Press as well. We have a branch now in France.
Yeah.
So some of our books are being published in French. We have a branch in Argentina. So some of our books are also being in Spanish. I work hand in hand with a company in Germany, and they're publishing a lot of our books in German as well. So, you know.
Well, these are important books, and this is really what I feel. So I think that you're one of the key ufologists in Great Britain, and you're one of the key players in terms of getting out really obscure information. And so, no, I think it's absolutely amazing. You know, I'm always checking your website looking for the next book, because I find material in there just that which you don't find in any of the other books.
I appreciate your support, Pierre. I really do.
Yeah. Because basically, I think that ufology had become very generic, and then you suddenly release all this new material, and it's like, wow, we've suddenly got all this material to study. And so,
and with the Calvin Parker case, of course, we found all kinds of things. People came out of the woodwork all over, and Calvin has also signed up with a producer. So a screenplay is being written, and it doesn't guarantee anything, but we're hopeful.
But that would make such a great film. And I think it would make a great film just in the same way of the Travis Walton case, because, again, there was that human element to it, wasn't there, in terms of that he couldn't really process what had happened to him. And the after effects of what had occurred, and obviously in the Parker and Hicks case, I think that's very interesting how the two men internalized it very differently.
Yeah, so, I mean, 3 weeks after the event, Calvin ended up in hospital, you know, with a breakdown, and he ran away from it all of his life. I was just fortunate that I caught up with him when I did, and he tried to put me off to begin with, but then his wife got hold of him, and there was no escaping then. You know,
I'm so glad that you managed to persuade him to talk about it, because, again, there's just so much more material that's come forward in that case that just wouldn't have been available otherwise.
Well, he's relieved now that he did it. And then, of course, last year, the town of Pascagoula unveiled a historical marker at the site dedicated to both him and the late Charles Hickson. That was opened by the mayor. Well, that's pretty unique in its own right, in some respects. Yeah.
Well, I think it does deserve to be recognised as one of the most important cases. It's up there with the Betty and Barney Hill case, and in some respects, I think it's more interesting because the men, they did have recollection of it, and some recollection of what actually occurred, and so that in itself was very important.
And of course, Calvin had another encounter in 1993. 20 years later, again, while he was fishing, and we uncovered all the hypnosis tapes that was done with Bud Hopkins, both him and Charlie. And then in September of last year, he was hypnotized again by Kathleen Marden. We found documents, you know, and we're still on the hunt for other stuff. We haven't stopped. I mean, we've come to a bit of a standstill because of the lockdown, but the hunt still goes on, being greatly assisted by Dr. Irina Scott in the States, and a chap by the name of Douglas Wilson, a member of MUFON, have been a great help. And it shows that UFO researchers can work together when instead of falling out and arguing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is important as well. Is that, and I feel this certainly because I work closely with Anthony Beckett, and you know Anthony Beckett because he arranges all the exopolitical conferences. But we certainly feel that what ufology needs is more consolidation. In a sense, it doesn't really matter if one person supports the extraterrestrial hypotheses and another person is a skeptic and another person thinks that it's spiritual or interdimensional, because really nobody really knows. And I think that many of the disciplines have some of the answers. And I think, therefore, keeping an open mind and looking at all of the disciplines and trying to work together in a spirit of consolidation is important. And I feel that that's really what you're doing. And this is why you've been so successful in terms of releasing this diversity of material. And I would definitely recommend any of my viewers who are interested in ufology, and particularly those who have got a very serious interest in ufology, to really look at these international cases that Philip has brought towards the general public, because these are important books, these are important documents, and I can guarantee that they will definitely further your understanding of what is occurring, and you will understand the phenomenon better as a result of delving into that. Well, it's an archive of material. I think this is what you're establishing with the Flying Disc Press. It is becoming literally a very important archive for very serious researchers in this field. So again, I just want to thank you for your time, for spending, in terms of really articulating very well the alien autopsy. I know it's on iPlayer, but is it going to be released as a TV series at all?
It's a 4-part series. It's on iPlayer and Amazon Prime.
Yeah, and
Alien Autopsy, The Search for Answers. Where it ends up is out of my hands, Pierre. Yeah. It's down to the production company. Who knows what might happen with it? Maybe if enough people download it, it might end up on Netflix or wherever. I don't honestly know.
Well, I hope it does find a home on Netflix, because it's really well produced, it's put together well, it's shot well, and again, because this is such an important case, it is the most comprehensive documentary that I've seen on the Sintelli case, and so I think it's just interesting for that. But it's also very well produced and put together, extremely well researched, and again, it's got the principal players in the films and in the interviews, and you're narrating it, or you're certainly telling the story and deconstructing your journey in terms of unraveling this important case. I definitely recommend you to check out Flying Disc Press and to obviously buy some of Philip's books, because they are extremely
Please buy some of my books so I can keep going.
Exactly. And we need to be working in the spirit of consolidation, and that's really what we're doing here, isn't it? We kind of we're good friends, we trade ideas, and we work together, and so congratulations on what you're doing. I'm an absolute fan of your work, and I'm just so excited about the new books that are coming out. I'm particularly excited about the British cases, and I'm guessing will some of those cases be dating from the 1980s and the 1990s?
They go back to pre-war.
Right, okay. So they will be very interesting again, because
Yeah.
I think as they go back earlier and earlier, there then becomes an interesting crossover with folklore. And
Well, it's funny.
are
It's
they
funny.
fairy encounters, or are they ufological encounters?
Yeah, we actually start off with a case where the fairies abducted a gentleman. So there you go.
Absolutely, and that would be a very appropriate place to start. So I just want to thank you again, Philip, for taking your time for
My pleasure, Pierre.
explaining everything, and I wish you luck in terms of Flying Disc Press. I do recommend that people watch the Alien Autopsy film on iPlayer.
It's Alien Autopsy, The Search for Answers.
And do you want to just plug your website as well?
Yeah, just punch in flyingdiscpress.com and you'll find me.
You'll find it on Google. Okay, thank you very much, Philip. Thank you.
Good night, Pierre, and may you and your family stay safe and well.
And same with you as well. Thank you very much.